The billionaire had spent 8 years hearing doctors tell her that her daughter might never speak, so when the little girl suddenly opened her mouth on a crowded playground and whispered one word, her mother nearly collapsed. But the most shocking part was not the word itself. It was who stood beside her when she said it, a quiet single father wearing an old work jacket, a man the billionaire had seen dozens of times pushing a maintenance cart through her office building. Her daughter had never spoken to him before, yet somehow she trusted him enough to make the sound she had refused to make for anyone else. The mother did not know that the quiet stranger was a former Navy SEAL, a man who had survived missions where silence meant survival and fear had to be controlled. If you believe kindness, forgiveness, hope, and second chances can change a life, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so our family can continue sharing emotional stories about courage, compassion, and unexpected second chances. Margaret Whitmore had everything people imagined a billionaire should have. She owned a global communications company, lived in an enormous estate, traveled in private aircraft, and had a staff of people whose job was to anticipate her needs before she expressed them. Her calendar was always full, her business decisions were carefully calculated, and her name carried enough influence to open almost any door. Yet there was one door she had spent 8 years desperately trying to open, and money had never been able to unlock it. That door was her daughter. 7-year-old Clara had not spoken since she was a toddler. Doctors had examined her hearing, neurological development, speech patterns, and emotional health. Specialists had conducted evaluations and recommended therapy after therapy. Nothing suggested that Clara was incapable of understanding language. She understood everything. She followed conversations. She read children's books. She communicated through writing, drawings, facial expressions, and gestures. But whenever she tried to speak, fear seemed to close around her throat. Margaret called it a tragedy. Clara experienced it as her normal life. The difference between those two perspectives had quietly created a wall between mother and daughter. Margaret tried everything. She hired expensive specialists and enrolled Clara in private programs. She built a quiet playroom inside their home. She arranged private lessons and carefully selected environments where nobody would pressure her daughter. But Margaret also became increasingly protective. She answered questions for Clara. She told people what Clara wanted before Clara could indicate it herself. She stopped taking her to crowded public places because she feared someone might embarrass her. Her intentions were loving. The result was suffocating. Clara began avoiding people even more. Then Margaret decided to do something she normally hated. She took Clara to a public playground. It was a bright afternoon, and the park was filled with children running between swings, slides, climbing structures, and picnic tables. Margaret's security team remained nearby, but she had deliberately asked them to keep their distance. She wanted Clara to experience an ordinary afternoon. Clara walked slowly beside her mother, holding a small stuffed rabbit. She watched other children playing. She wanted to join them. But she was afraid. Margaret sat on a bench and encouraged her daughter to explore. Clara eventually walked toward the climbing area, but a group of older children rushed past her, laughing loudly. Clara stepped backward and immediately became overwhelmed. Then a man appeared. His name was Callan Mercer. Callan was 40 years old, a single father raising his 9-year-old son, Rory. He worked in building maintenance and had come to the park with Rory during his lunch break. He was wearing a plain gray jacket and carrying a small backpack containing snacks, water, and a first aid kit. Margaret had seen him before. Several times. He was one of the maintenance workers at her company's headquarters. She had never spoken to him. Callan noticed Clara standing alone. He did not approach her immediately. Instead, he watched from a respectful distance. Rory was playing nearby when he tripped and scraped his knee. Callan calmly helped him up, cleaned the scrape, and placed a small bandage over it. Clara watched. There was something about Callan's calmness that caught her attention. He never rushed. He never panicked. He never made Rory feel embarrassed for falling. After a few minutes, Clara slowly approached. Callan noticed her stuffed rabbit. He took a small wooden puzzle from his backpack and placed it on the bench. He did not ask her name. He did not ask why she was silent. He simply let her decide whether she wanted to interact. Clara picked up the puzzle. She solved it. Callan smiled. Clara smiled back. Margaret watched from across the playground. Something about the interaction made her nervous. She had spent years making sure strangers never got too close to Clara. Yet Clara had approached this man voluntarily. Callan noticed that Clara seemed interested in Rory's small toy airplane. He showed her how it worked. Clara began following the airplane with her eyes as Rory moved it across the bench. For the next half hour, something remarkable happened. Clara played. She laughed silently. She pointed. She smiled. She interacted with another child. And Margaret realized she had not seen her daughter this relaxed around strangers in years. Then a sudden sound changed everything. A maintenance truck nearby dropped a metal container. The sharp crash echoed across the playground. Clara froze. Her breathing became rapid. She covered her ears. Margaret immediately stood. But Callan was already moving. He did not grab Clara. He did not tell her to calm down. He simply moved into her field of vision and lowered himself to her level. His movements were slow and controlled. He guided her attention towards simple things around them. The grass. The trees. The blue sky. The sound of birds. Rory quietly moved closer but stayed behind his father. Clara's breathing gradually slowed. Margaret stood several feet away, stunned. She had seen therapists attempt the same thing. She had seen specialists spend hours teaching Clara coping techniques. But Callan had instinctively understood what to do. Margaret wanted to know why. Then Clara looked directly at Callan. Her lips trembled. For 8 years, they had remained silent. Margaret held her breath. Clara tried again. A tiny sound escaped. Then she whispered one word. "Hi." Margaret froze. Everything around her seemed to disappear. The playground continued moving, children continued laughing, and parents continued talking, but Margaret heard only that one tiny word. Clara had spoken. Callan did not celebrate. He did not look shocked. He simply smiled gently, as if Clara had done exactly what he knew she could do. That reaction made Margaret cry. She rushed toward her daughter, but Callan quietly stepped back, allowing Clara to choose what happened next. Clara reached for her mother. Margaret dropped to her knees and hugged her. For several seconds, neither of them moved. Margaret was shaking. Clara was crying. But they were happy tears. When Margaret finally looked at Callan, she realized she knew almost nothing about him. She asked how he had known what to do. Callan explained that his military training had taught him how to recognize panic and maintain calm during chaotic situations. He had served as a Navy SEAL for years before leaving the military. Margaret was stunned. The maintenance worker from her company had once been a highly trained member of an elite military unit. But Callan explained that his military history was not the important part. His son was. Rory had experienced severe anxiety after Callan's divorce, and Callan had spent years learning how to help him regulate his emotions. He had discovered that frightened children did not need adults shouting instructions at them. They needed adults who could remain calm enough for the child to borrow that calm. Margaret looked at Clara. She realized that was exactly what had happened. Callan had not made her daughter speak. He had made her feel safe enough to try. That distinction changed everything. Margaret began investigating Callan's background, partly out of caution and partly because she could not stop thinking about him. His military history was impressive. He had served honorably. He had participated in demanding operations. He had received commendations. He had lost friends. He had returned home carrying memories he rarely discussed. But Margaret discovered something that impressed her far more than his military record. Callan had been offered several high-paying security positions after leaving the military. He had rejected them. They required travel. He wanted to raise Rory himself. He had chosen a modest job because it allowed him to be present for his son. Margaret thought about her own life. She had billions. Callan had far less. Yet he had something she had slowly lost. Time. After that afternoon, Margaret began allowing Clara to spend more time at the park. Callan and Rory sometimes happened to be there. The friendship grew naturally. Callan never became Clara's therapist. He never tried to replace her father. He simply became a safe adult in her life. Clara started speaking more. At first, only 1 or 2 words. Then short sentences. There were days when she became silent again. Margaret no longer panicked. She had learned that healing did not move in a straight line. One afternoon, Clara became frustrated because she could not pronounce a word correctly. Margaret almost intervened. Then she stopped. She remembered what Callan had taught her. Do not rescue someone from every difficult moment. Give them the confidence to get through it. Clara tried again. She succeeded. Margaret smiled. She realized her daughter was becoming stronger because she was finally being allowed to struggle. The relationship between Margaret and Clara changed too. Margaret stopped speaking for her. At restaurants, she waited. At school meetings, she let Clara answer when she wanted to. At family gatherings, she no longer explained her daughter's silence. She simply gave Clara space. It was difficult. Margaret had spent years believing that good parenting meant eliminating every obstacle. Now she was learning that good parenting sometimes meant standing nearby while your child faced the obstacle herself. Callan also began changing. Margaret encouraged him to share his military experience through a foundation supporting veterans and single parents. He resisted at first. He did not want publicity. He did not want his SEAL history turned into a marketing story. Margaret understood. So she made him an offer without attaching his name to the project. He could help design the program anonymously. Callan agreed. The program provided childcare assistance, job training, emergency support, and mentorship to veterans raising children alone. It became one of the most meaningful projects Margaret had ever funded. Not because it generated publicity. Because it helped real families. Years later, Clara stood on a small community stage at one of the foundation's daytime events. She was no longer the silent child everyone worried about. She was confident, thoughtful, and still somewhat shy. She spoke about children who struggled to communicate. She spoke about fear. She spoke about the importance of patience. And she spoke about a single father who had once sat beside her on a playground and never once demanded that she speak. Callan stood in the audience with Rory. He looked embarrassed by the attention. Clara smiled at him. Then she thanked him. Margaret sat beside them, wiping tears from her eyes. She remembered the woman she had been years earlier. A billionaire who thought she could buy solutions. A mother who believed protection meant control. A woman who thought silence was something to defeat. Now she understood something completely different. Clara had never needed someone to force her voice into the world. She needed someone to believe that her voice was already there. Callan had believed it. And because he did, Clara eventually began believing it too. Margaret later established a permanent program for children with communication difficulties and their families. She insisted that it focus not on expensive equipment or prestigious names, but on patience, dignity, and practical support. Callan became one of its advisors. He still worked with veterans. He still raised Rory. He still preferred ordinary clothes and quiet afternoons. His old Navy SEAL experience remained a part of his past, but it was no longer the thing people used to define him. He was a father. A mentor. A friend. And to Clara, he was the man who had listened to her silence without being afraid of it. Before we reach the ending, leave a meaningful comment and tell us what lesson touched you most. Was it Callan's patience, Clara's courage, or Margaret's realization that love sometimes means stepping back instead of taking control? Your words may encourage someone who is waiting for a loved one's voice, healing, or second chance. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey. Because Margaret had taken her daughter to the playground hoping to teach her how to be less afraid of the world. Instead, the world taught Margaret something. The billionaire had thought the quiet man in the maintenance uniform was simply a stranger. Then she discovered the old Navy SEAL beneath that ordinary appearance. But even his military history was not the greatest surprise. The greatest surprise was discovering that a man who had once been trained to survive dangerous missions understood something about children that wealth, specialists, and expensive treatments had failed to teach her. Sometimes you cannot force healing. You cannot buy courage. You cannot demand trust. You can only create a safe enough place for someone to find those things within themselves. Callan never made Clara speak. He simply stayed beside her until she was ready. And when that tiny voice finally emerged after 8 silent years, it was only one word. Hi. But to Margaret, it sounded like the beginning of an entirely new life. A life where her daughter did not have to be protected from every difficulty. A life where mistakes were allowed. A life where fear could exist without controlling the future. And a life where the greatest heroes were no longer measured by wealth, medals, or titles. Sometimes the greatest hero is simply the person who stays. The person who waits. The person who believes in you before you are strong enough to believe in yourself.